energy poverty, which need to be taken into account. And I'm sorry I ran out of time. I would love to have spoken a lot more about that, but yes, basically, that's my basic point. It's a general sort of transformative social movement out there which is responsible for keeping sustainability alive, and we need to connect with that in all sorts of different communities around the world. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. We have quick time for some questions around in the room. Do you have questions? Okay, maybe I have one.
Yes.
You speak a lot about the concept of resilience. How far is possible the resilience, for example, if we go by a tipping point or something like that?
Yeah, I'm using resilience. I used it in terms of the energy resilience narratives. We're trying to get a discussion going on. I never used the concept of tipping point exactly.
Okay.
But it's there are critics of the resilience concept who say that it implies too much. It's possible to return to a previous state, that it's bounce back ability. Mm. So having received a shock, we can turn. That's, I don't think, capturing the strength. I mean, I do really appreciate the way that Arturo Escobar has discussed a lot of these issues in his book Designs for the Pluriverse. And I think he's paying a lot of genuine attention to the different intellectual traditions, from resilience thinking, transitions thinking, degrowth, food sovereignty movements, all these kind of different ways of articulating that would put, I mean, yes, I'm using resilience in relation to some work going on with climate change in the small island developing states in Pacific and Caribbean as well. And it's using the terms that they're offering us about weaving climate resilience together. Well, that's going to be the next piece that I'll be working on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Questions? Yes.
Please, in the microphone.
Every writer you're talking about some other writers, other books, various books, but I don't have notes then. So could you?
I could make the bibliography available.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, good question. Good remark about the bibliography. Thank you very much. The next keynote speaker is Nathalie Herve-Fournereau from the Institut de l'Ouest Droit et Europe, Law and Europe, from Rennes. And the title of the presentation is Critical Reflections on EU Green Deal, Rethinking the Concept of Vulnerability to Build New Socio-Ecological Solidarities. So, thank you.
Okay, so I think it will be. Yep. I need my computer. I think it will be okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and very pleased to be in Strasbourg. I would like to thank very deeply Elisabeth, Gwenaël, Laurent, Rémi, Marie-Claire, Karl Matthias, and the team, and Céline Cordier, for hosting and organizing this symposium of this topic, what is always a source of debate. I remember the CNRS collective work on sustainable development, published in 2013 under the title Sustainable Development à découvert. The United Nations Agenda 2030, the European Green Deal, the COVID pandemic, and the recent report on climate change and biodiversity once again invite us to question what is not working and what we should be doing. Yet, the urgency is now widely known and experienced. So the contribution I propose today is a part of a research project we recently built with a colleague from political science on the Green Deal, European Green Deal, democracy and solidarities at local level, with important connection with another project in REN, Intelligence Environmental. In this project, we invite to question this new European Green Deal and commitment to sustainability and implementation at local level through the crucial issue of solidarities, vulnerabilities and inequalities. To do so, I propose today just to try to revisit the concept of vulnerability in order to build new social ecological solidarities in the perspective to achieve a strong sustainability. Of course, my presentation is only a first paper to explore this topic, so just give you a few reflections, a lot of questions, and few results, of course. At the beginning of my introduction, I'll just give you some questions and to present the context of my paper. So, the European Green Deal, which kind of new agenda? Nothing new under the sun, we can say it. In fact, is it a new agenda 21, agenda revisited? Or is it a real foundation for a radical paradigm shift, disruptive strategy, in fact? If you just take into account the adjective of transformational change in the European Green Deal, both. In fact, I think just it's a reflect of a socio-ecological transition process. In few words, I just give you another view of European Green Deal. The European Green Deal constitutes a strong European political commitment after the European Parliament election, and it is the first priority of a new president of the Commission to prove that climate change, to prove that the question of environment is one of the priority of the EU and adopt this European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is also a part of a European strategy to implement the sustainable development goals at the international level. But it's also a sort of first roadmap of ambition and action to take at the EU level, member state level, and also at the authority local level, and of course at the international level, to imagine new solution and new action to transform EU policy. Yes. The European this European Green Deal is also a way to express different ambition. The first ambition is to prove that the EU now has a real awareness of ecological emergencies, and of course of a well-known concept of planetary boundaries and the multiplicity of temporalities to take into account. And everybody now, I think, this European oath, like Hippocrates, do not harm. In the European Green Deal, we could find also the express that the European Union need to pay more attention to the social pillar of sustainable development perspective, in particular related that the fact the more people which are affected by climate change or loss of biodiversity are the most vulnerable people. So it's very important to see in this European Green Deal that social aspects are one of the heart of this Green Deal. The European Green Deal expresses also the necessity to reinforce the importance of involving all, not only stakeholders, but all the people, and to act together. It's another, I will say, heart of this European Green Deal. And the last thing I think it's very interesting to focus on, it's that for the EU, the succeed, how to make this European Green Deal successful is to imagine and to adopt a very strategic investment plan to find enough subsidies to achieve this different action and ambition. But as you can imagine, it was the reason I am here to explain also the grey areas, the tropism, and the risk presented by this European Green Deal. Strong or weak sustainability, it's always the same question since so many years ago. And the discourse, behind the discourse of for the transformation change, uncertainties remain again. It's difficult to say if the EU really integrate the necessity to change its paradigms and the priority to economic pillar. It's really difficult to find and to say yes or not. It's really grey areas of the Green Deal. But one of the tropism of the Green Deal, it's also the tropism Green Deal or climate green. And again, little problem. So it's a grey area. I do not have a right to critique, to criticism. Yeah. I think, yeah, perfect. If not, I stop my...
Sorry.
No, never mind, it's okay. So, Green Deal or climate deal. The climate tropism is not hypothetical. When everybody could read in the European Green Deal the importance of focus and related to climate crisis. But it is important to take this issue under an ecosystemic approach. Just give an example. Everybody in France have the discourse of President Macron related to nuclear power. And the question is not a small question, in fact, because do we consider nuclear power is sustainable energy? And if we consider nuclear energy sustainable energy, so it is a sustainable investment. And so it's possible to continue to give subsidies to such energy. Is it the future? It is sustainable? We can ask the question. And so it's very important to take into account this tropism, this climate tropism in the European Green Deal. Another tropism and risk, of course, it is the question of a pandemic and the effect of the pandemic. And the COVID pandemic could be also sort of brake or accelerator for the Green Deal. And everybody has in mind the world after and the world before. So which kind of effect we could imagine with such pandemic on the European Green Deal and its implementation. Another risk is the confrontation of economic, social, and ecological vulnerabilities. In the European Green Deal, we have in fact two sorts of vulnerability. Two sorts of. I'm sorry, no, I just come from small Britain, not big Britain. And we have in fact in the European Green Deal two types of vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities related to region, sector, confronted face to the ecological transition. And we need to find a way to help this sector to be able to succeed and to raise, to succeed to be able to make their activity without carbon, fossil fuel, etc., etc. In the same time, the European Green Deal wants to fight against and to find solutions related to social vulnerabilities, in particular related to the most vulnerable people affected by climate change or biodiversity loss, etc., etc. So, how to do search and find solution to go over this tension and this contradiction of the European Green Deal. So, it was the reason why I proposed to try to rethink and to revisit the concept of vulnerabilities in order to try to reach a more strong sustainability perspective during the implementation of the European Green Deal. 3 remarks. The first remark is related to the question of vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities under the ecological and social emergencies. Of course, vulnerability and vulnerabilities are a state, but also a process, visible or invisible, with plural, temporal, and dynamic retroaction, tipping point, uncertainties, etc. We are facing to diversity of vulnerabilities, affective place, human, non-human activities, and capacity to react, to adapt, and to go further. Actually, we are facing to a sort of amplification of vulnerabilities and inequalities. For example, eco-anxiety, in particular among the young people. But also the question of access to energy, to access to essential services. We know during this pandemic how the question of essential, which kind of essential service? Cultural service? In law, the classical approach is well known to try to give answer to vulnerability. Human right, it's kind of approach. Strict protection regime, derogation regime, exemption regime, support, financial support, of course, to help people to support these different vulnerabilities. But how to find a good balance between the different vulnerabilities, which are very different, in fact, in nature, which affect different people, human and non-human. How to combine, how to deal, in fact, with so different vulnerability at different level, at different with different temperature. How it's possible to do it? Perhaps it's possible to promote an extensive conception of vulnerabilities of course, protect. It's one of the figure of vulnerabilities concept, but also to connect. And I'm very, very pleased to listen to your presentation about dimension and relational dimension, because I think for vulnerability, when we feel vulnerable, we need to be together and try to find solidarities. And so the question of connection is very important in this concept. Also, the question, another figure of vulnerabilities concept is how to invest. Why not invest in vulnerabilities, in fact, to be more to be more union, I would say. So, promoting this extensive concept of vulnerability need also to take into account the singularity of EU law and the EU competency. The EU is not able to do everything. It's not its role. And we need to take into account the different way and the different nature of competencies of EU with a very, I would say, sort of a tension between economic aspects, in which the EU has plenty competencies to act for the market, for the competition, and related to social aspect or cultural aspect, the EU are not able to create a very strong policy in those areas. So it's very hiatus, in fact, between the importance competency in the economic activities and the weak and the small, I will say, competency in other fields. I just have a look to my. So my second point, related vulnerabilities, is to try to combine, in fact, vulnerabilities and solidarities, and how to reconnect and to act together. And reconnection and act together is really, in fact, the spirit, normally the spirit of European Green Deal. So it's important to put attention on the possibility to combine vulnerabilities and solidarities. Related the question of social and economic solidarities, we have in fact the transversal principle of a European Green Deal. No one is left behind, so we need to have this in mind. Related the question of solidarity, in the European law, solidarities is not only a value, the spirit, it is the identity of the EU. It's the reason why the EU was created. It's to create de facto a solidarity, and after to create a very important project. So it's also a legal principle. We have a recent case law in the field of energy policy, in which the court insists in recognize that the solidarities is a legal principle and impose obligation to member states and to the EU. I just give you on my slide the expression used by the EU. And it's very interesting to see that now solidarity is a legal principle which could be diffused in all the activities and policy of the EU, including environmental policy. Which kind of EU approach we can find related to the question of solidarities? Of course, again, financial support, derogation, exemption regime, and we have different, I give you different examples related to the support financial, the new support financial related the Green Deal connected to the COVID pandemic. For example, the proposal of the European Commission related to the Social Climate Fund, or the recent recommendation of the European Commission related to energy poverty. So we can find, after the Green Deal, some legal example which prove that this question of vulnerabilities and the solidarity are emerged more and more at the EU level. Related ecological solidarities, it's different. I think just because in the European Green Deal, of course, this question of ecological solidarities is a fact which is taken into account by the European Green Deal, but the European Union does actually, it's difficult to find in the EU a real legal principle of ecological solidarity, unlike France. Perhaps it could be a next step of the implementation of the EU strategy on biodiversity, but now in our European law, it's not an express legal recognition of ecological solidarity principle. Of course, we have, I give you another example, which shows that the question of ecological solidarity could emerge, or some, for example, in the directive I just mentioned, the directive on environmental liability. This could be a way to explore and in order to recognize such ecological solidarity principle. My last remark related the possibility to find differently the concept of vulnerability and to build new socio-ecological solidarities. I think this possibility needs to be the basis of a strong sustainability. I'll give you four examples related to this proposal. I think it's very important to promote an holistic approach for an imperative legal change of perspective. We need now to act. We have too many discourse, too political discourse, so we need actually to promote and to engage an holistic approach. Environmental issue, it is the same for social issue, but environmental issue must be the foundation of the sustainability, not an adjustment variable or just a simple policy to accompanying economic activities. I just put on my slide, this presentation to show another way of presentation and representation of sustainable development. On the foundation of sustainable development, we find environmental pillar. And after, of course, the other social pillar and economic pillar, which is only the tool to succeed and the tool to reach these ecological and social solidarities. Bringing nature back into our life, it is the title of European strategy on biodiversity. It's a way to find and to imagine concepts connected, the social dimension and the ecological dimension. I think the concept of One Health and the concept on One Health is now one of the concepts which are emerging during the COVID pandemic in different documents at the EU level. Natural common, I see Marie-Pierre, and Marie-Pierre in this room is one of the French specialists of natural common in French law, and it could be very interesting if this concept could be discussed and debated at the European level too. Right of nature is another way to think and to promote social solidarity between the aspect of social aspect and ecological aspect. So bringing nature back into our lives, it's one way. Another initiative, very interesting, and I just discovered it in few weeks before. It's a new European Burn House. I don't know if you discover this European initiative. And this European initiative from the Commission is focused on three slogans, three principles. I will say beautiful, sustainable, and together. And it's a way to introduce cultural dimension to implement the European Green Deal. And in this project, in fact, the main objective is to experiment at local level different projects such as how to reconnect to nature, how to reinforce the sense of belonging, and to put together people from artists, architects, all disciplines together to try to experiment new way of life. The possibility to create and to build a socio-ecological solidarities need to be based on a right and duty and on the principle of regression. At the EU level, we don't have actually the express recognition of environmental right. I just, perhaps you see, but in our Charter of Fundamental Rights at the EU, we just have a small provision related to the principle of integration, but no this provision on the recognition of right to nature, of the right to an environment, in fact. And I just give you the information, but perhaps you know it's the recent report at the Council of Europe on the possibility, again, to try to promote a complete reconnection of human to environment, right of human to environment. Perhaps it's possible to imagine at the EU level sort of reconnection of ecological solidarities. Perhaps we could imagine it could be possible. Two last remarks. How to build, I think, as I just said before, that the economic pillar occupied a very strong place, again, in the European Green Deal. I think it's very important to try to build a better and stronger interaction between environmental and social EU policy. We need, in fact, to create and to propose an integrated, comprehensive European strategy on these two topics, because we don't have enough elements in the European Green Deal. Of course, it's important to support the employability to the ecological transition, education, training, retraining, etc., and to try to build a real strategy to fight against poverty and to fight against socio-ecological vulnerabilities. And the last one, if we want to succeed the European Green Deal under this new conception of ecological and social solidarities, it's really important to reinforce again the democratic foundation for this transformational change promoted by the European Green Deal. I'll give you again some example how to reinforce this democratic foundation. Of course, the EU need to respect the Paris Convention, and this week we have a committee of the party of the Paris Convention on information, participation, and access to justice in the environmental field. Yes, I know. So it's very important to reinforce and to force, in fact, the community to respect this Paris Convention. In the European Green Deal, a few a few aspects and few comments related to stakeholder, but we need to go further. The participation of stakeholder, not only stakeholder, but all citizens, and to try to invite people and the most vulnerable people to have a voice. Nature has no voice, but it's the same for vulnerable people. They have no voice. So how to find a common voice for people and non-human, which are the more vulnerable. The strong participation of local authorities is very important too, and the European Committee for Region in focus its last report on this aspect. The success of the European Green Deal needs to be more connected to local level and to authorities at the local level. And of course, we need not to forget the role of company and the finance. Thank you for your attention. So, after Brittany.
So thank you very, very much, Nathalie. We have time for questions in the room. So if you have questions. Laurent?
I have a question. Sorry for my English, it's not very good.
Oh, me too.
You're talking about bringing back nature to our life. It's one of the aspects of the European Green Deal. That's what you said one time. Well, I'm in architecture and in urbanism, and this is what is every centuries architect and urbanism are talking about bringing back nature to house and city and to the place where we live. So it's not really a question, it's just a remark. How to do further on when in every centuries every people are talking about bringing back nature in the city. That since Thoreau or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we have the town of Karlsruhe, which is very near, and the map of Karlsruhe in the 18th century was built with the nature in the city, and little by little the city is growing and grabbing the city. So every time this question is appearing, that's why for me it's a kind of mystery, or it's a Graal, I don't know, something like that. It's a remark, it's not a question. How to maybe asking the question in another way, with other words, to bring back the nature in the city. I don't know how to say.
You know, it's sort of slogan. It's the name of EU European strategy on biodiversity. And if we take the title of the European strategy before, it was related to natural capital. So behind the word, it's very interesting. Of course, among different centuries, it's always a need. So it's human need, in fact. But it's very interesting to see how the European Commission changed its discourse related to biodiversity, because we have different concepts to speak about biodiversity. Because the concept of natures is not used by European Commission during long time. We use biodiversity, and after ecosystem services, and after natural capitals, and after green infrastructure, to connect social and economic and environmental aspects. But it's very interesting to see that last year, when the European Commission adopted the European Strategy on Biodiversity, she decided again to put the accent on bring nature back to our life. We need to, I think, to reflect why it's so important to again put the accent of the connection with nature. And during the pandemic, everyone say, "Oh, I need to go outside," because we feel completely disconnected to nature. So I think last century and before we have different need again, but this question of need to be connected to nature, it's sort of, I don't know how to say, but I think it's a question of for my colleagues,
Of course.
to understand why, just because human is a part of nature, and to feel connected to nature it's just
I think
intrinsic human, but I don't know.
It could be
From the legal point of view, it's
I think it could be a contradiction, maybe in the
Yeah.
human being.
yeah.
Needing nature
In the same
needing
time.
the community and
Yeah.
something which is
In the same time.
ambivalent. You said? You
We
understand?
say ambivalent, tension, contradiction, and how to deal. Just as I put on one of my slides, how to which kind of priority, how to conciliate. So we need to make choice. So which kind of choice we make? But it's always a question how to do it. Yeah.
Because I think when you look on the history,
Yeah.
the more we create, the more we grow, the more we are distant from the floor. The floor is completely covered. We are driving. We are with the phoning and so on, and we are out of the ground. And the more the history is growing, and the more we are out of the ground. So that's why I'm asking this question, because the nature, where is the nature in the end?
Yeah.
But it's a remark.
Very, very interesting, yes, because as I explained, it's just an exploratory analysis, so I need a question and a suggestion.
I'm thinking
and
about
ideas.
a paper about the man, comment on dit?
In French, let's go.
Un homme en lévitation. L'homme est de plus en plus en lévitation et de moins en moins en contact avec le sol. Et donc, voilà. Et plus l'histoire grandit, plus l'histoire avance, et moins on est en contact avec le sol. Et donc, moi, ça me perturbe. C'est pour ça que je suis ici.
Thank you all. My name is Frederick Sundberg. I worked in the Council of Europe for many years in intergovernmental cooperation and as head of the Department for Execution of Judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. And I just felt that since we were here discussing European matters, it is not just the EU. It is also a considerable concern for the Council of Europe. And there are, of course, a number of rights under the European Convention which are very relevant for environmental protection. The right to life, the right to private life, and I think also very importantly, the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of association, because what is being discussed here is not always totally anodyne and may call for reactions by authorities and others to compel people to shut up. And there, of course, the convention brings a strong protection. There's also a lot of interaction with the EU, usually synergies. We have an interesting case, Cordella, concerning ArcelorMittal and the disrespect, major disrespect of environmental protection in Italy. The EU is moving forward with infringement proceedings. We have a judgment from the European Court on the same issue, trying from both sides to push this big giant to comply with environmental protection rules. But there are plenty of things which could be said. I just thought the opportunity might be this one to highlight a little bit also that the Council of Europe conducts a number of reflections also on these issues which are highly relevant. And I think Elisabeth knows of one from last year in the midst of the, well, not really, just before the COVID, in fact, if I remember correctly. So she could appear unmasked. But there is, for example, the protocol to the convention being planned on environmental rights, which could be very interesting. But perhaps most importantly, the Council of Europe works at the level of 47. With all these issues, we reach out to Russia, to Ukraine, to the Caucasus, to the Balkans, and can engage the discussion on all these very important issues wider than just in this small Europe, if you excuse the expression, which where we live. And I just think that it could be interesting when research is being pursued to integrate also that thinking. Of course, it will not always be as deep as what you can have in the EU, because we have to have rules and recommendations which can be acceptable to greater units. But there's a lot of creative thinking, a lot of new ideas, and a lot of, I think, inspiration to get also from what is said in that fora.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, some other question? Okay, I have one question. I like the idea that you make the relation between sustainability and solidarities, and I was thinking about how to take also in consideration the fact that how we can stop this huge acceleration where we live, economic acceleration, the needed of, for example, primary product, which is a huge concern for the present. The question of the big company profit and how to bring back the profit from the company to the citizen. And the last point, how to make the fact that the citizen feel more involved in the decision and in the problems, because we know that, for example, the fear of some people concerning, for example, the vaccination or different laws are probably due to the fact that they don't feel involved and concerned by the questions, but not by the question, but by the decision. So maybe the question of the solidarities and the relationship among the society between the citizens and between citizens and policymakers and all the things are linked to these different questions.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it is the reason why the European Committee for Region focus its recent report on the importance to local authorities and to think at local level too. Not only, of course, connected to different and even global level, but it's really important to it's sort of proximity solidarities. How to combine proximity solidarities without forget the other peoples, in particular in the south of our planets. But if we take the example of the new project of the European Commission, Bauhaus, it's a very old movement, in fact, cultural movement. And in this project, I don't know if it could be a success or not. I really don't know. But in this project, the European Commission wants that at local level, people try to put together their ideas, their experience, and to think differently. C'est la mode. Lab, living lab, everywhere, living lab. But perhaps some people not be very ready to participate even in a living lab.
Mhm.
So how to promote, perhaps at the beginning, education, access to education. I just take another example. It's an example from my student. I have some students, they come from ecological science and geoscience and legal science. And this year, we decide to organize conference on the topic, why engage for environmental issues. It's very interesting to see that a lot of people, you speak about the risk related, the people who protect environmental issues. And it's very interesting to see that people would like to participate, would like to be concerned, but they're afraid. Not only journalists, but also academic, but also different people who want to be engaged in solidarities or environmental, social issue. They're afraid not only to be attacked, but also to be, how to say, how to be sure that our opinion will be taken in due consideration by public authorities. It is in the law. We need, when participate in different process, we need to be sure that our opinion is taken into account, and how it's possible to see that. So it's not a complete answer, because your answer is your question is is very large.
Yeah.
But I think the local level could be very interesting, but be aware of the negative impact of putting everything at local level.
Sure. It's okay. So the next speaker is is Anna Julia Seeger. She's a PhD candidate from Humboldt University, and the title of the presentation is "The Future of Sustainability is Procedural: A Lesson from International Climate Change Law." Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Welcome from my side, and many thanks to the organizers and to the previous speakers. In the following 20 minutes, I will propose a procedural understanding of sustainability as a legal concept. I will do so by drawing a lesson from international climate change law. So now we are coming from the European to the international legal level. A small disclaimer: as I do not take the plane, you might see way less fancy photographs in this presentation, but I hope it will help anyways also for the public, which is online. I will start by presenting the problem of how difficult it is to find a common and clear-cut understanding of sustainability in the legal context. The discussion about sustainability in the legal field has been framed as the sustainability of what debate, to which the following presentation is going to contribute. In the second step, I will propose looking at the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, which is the youngest international treaty on climate change, as a field of inspiration for a new understanding of sustainability as a legal concept. And finally, I will introduce the concept of sustainability as procedure and explain how this procedural understanding may help to operationalize the concept of sustainability for legal research. Despite the numerous references to sustainability, be it in policy papers, media, or other fora, some of them have been indicated in the introductory words, it remains a very vague concept from a legal perspective. If we look at the origins of sustainability, we can find different points of reference. Judge Vera Mantri, in his separate opinion in the ICJ case concerning the Napchikovo-Narimaros project, on which I will delve a bit more in a moment, points towards sustainable practices in ancient times. So he finds very old examples of staying within the ecological limits of natural resources. For example, the human interference with watercourses in Sri Lanka is one of his examples. This suggests that the idea of sustainability is much older than the term sustainability. However, we must be careful not to project our current understanding into the past, because especially the complexity of global environmental challenges risks to be underestimated. So I claim that sustainability needs to be always interpreted against the given historical background. We can have a look at another point of reference of the origins of sustainability, and this is when sustainability was first introduced in the legal realm. The concept dates back to the 18th century, and in the 18th century we find it in German forestry management law, so quite hidden, if you want to. At that time, sustainability was a mere economic concept and could be described with the dictum of do not harvest more than what is growing to maximize the economic output of the forest. This idea was written down by Hans Carl von Carlowitz in his oeuvre Silvicultura Economica from 1713. So if this photo is a bit foggy, maybe we can record it because it's quite old. So this term he uses there in his oeuvre is Nachhaltigkeit, the German word, and it has been translated on an international political level into sustainability. What is sustainability today, finally? Sustainability is both a political leitmotif as well as an ethical concept on a global level. Does it have a legal character? Yes, but the concept has varying legal meanings and it is embedded into different institutional contexts. Whether it is a principle of international law actually remains a debated issue. We find different concepts of sustainability, and I will be quick on this point because I think maybe there will be in a later presentation more on this. I hope so. So there's a very narrow understanding which reduces sustainability to a mere environmental concept, and a wider understanding which builds on the three pillars of economic, social, and environmental elements. In current UN praxis debates, we can find especially a focus on the enhancement of social elements, but also the integration of cultural elements into the concept of sustainability. I would like to add to this and present another approach that has been developed quite recently in the context of German constitutional law. So this approach might be labeled as the sustainability through procedure approach. One of the most famous or important exponents of this approach is Wolfgang Kahl with his cited book in 2016. So the idea of this approach is that we might achieve sustainability through procedural elements. So the authors or exponents of this approach point towards institutional and organizational measures, such as, for example, sustainability assessment procedures or the obligation of rectification. While this approach is very fruitful, I claim that it must be developed further because it encounters various problems. The procedural measures are only supplementary to sustainability. So ultimately, the question of the sustainability of what remains unanswered. What goal is to be achieved through the procedural measures? Who defines sustainability? How is this the definition legitimized? How can it be changed or adjusted? And again, through which procedure and involving which actors. I think some of them we have seen in the photographs in the first presentation. So I think this comes up again, this question of who is behind the definition of sustainability. Now my approach is to find an answer to these questions, and ultimately to the sustainability of what question, we must take into account what the law says. I claim that sustainability is itself a procedure, and that by understanding sustainability as procedure, we can operationalize sustainability for legal research. So it is less about sustainability for political ends, without risking its fragmentation. What does it mean to take a look at the law, or more exactly, which legal regime to look at? I propose to have a closer look at the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Why? Because sustainability is closely linked to the law on climate change. This has been true from its outset. So when we have been talking about the Rio package, which was introduced in 1992, and here we find the Brundtland definition of sustainability, but we find also, which is in the Rio Declaration, which is not legally binding, but at the same time there are two international treaties in the Rio package, one of which is the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this goes as far as that climate change has been framed the problem of sustainability par excellence. Today, the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change is considered a milestone in the process of achieving the current Sustainable Development Goals. So what does the Paris Agreement tell us about sustainability? It puts famously, and I think this is known to everybody here, in its Article 2, Paragraph 1, Littera A, the limit to the global rise of temperature to 1.5 to well below 2 degrees Celsius. It does so in a legally binding form. So it is undisputed that the Paris Agreement is an international treaty. However, it does not contain legally binding nation-state commitments to the global response to climate change. These commitments must be nationally determined within the so-called NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions. This architecture has been labeled as the bottom-up architecture of the Paris Agreement. And while it has been criticized for its weakness, one important trait of this architecture is that the measures to be taken to stay within the temperature limit are rooted in domestic decision-making processes. So the Paris Agreement establishes a procedure both on the national and on the international level to reach the goal of limiting global temperature rise. And this procedure replaces the binding nation-state commitments we have still seen for Annex I countries under the former Kyoto Protocol mechanism. Parties are legally bound to hand in their NDC and to strengthen them over time. This is one, I think this was written there, yeah. One important duty, legal duty under the Paris Agreement written down in Article 4. So what we can see here is that the Paris Agreement establishes a dynamic of compliance to reach to stay within the long-term temperature goal, and it does establish an ongoing process. To sum up, the Paris Agreement sets a legally binding goal in relation to one of the most important sustainability problems, which is climate change. To reach this goal, it establishes a joint procedure both on the national and on the international level. In this process, parties ought to take into account the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, and the principle of intergenerational equity. And these two principles are quite essential at this point because they together constitute the aim to reach climate justice. So one of the first principle, the CBDR principle, is more in a geographical and historical dimension to achieve justice or equity between countries from the global south and countries from the global north. And the intergenerational equity, as its name already says, is about equity between different generations, also with a view to the future. So the Paris Agreement actually incorporates a procedural understanding of sustainability. And this understanding can be developed further. From a legal perspective, I claim, sustainability can be framed in the following way. Sustainability is a process of complying with a goal or limit rooted in international law that aims at resolving global environmental problems. This procedural reading of sustainability is rooted in a combination of, on the one hand, the global legal limit to climate change or other global environmental problems, if we develop it further, and on the other hand, procedural elements to achieve this goal at different legal levels. At the same time, sustainability stands in the light of the principle of intergenerational equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So I have been pointing towards the 2015 Paris Agreement, so a quite recent international treaty, but we can also come back to earlier, for example, jurisprudence of the ICJ, and find earlier traces of such a procedural understanding of sustainability. Let us come back to the case concerning the Napchikovo-Nagimaros project. Here, the ICJ has considered sustainability to include procedural elements. It ruled that both parties, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, had to consider relevant environmental standards when building a hydropower plant at the Danube River. This procedural duty, the court stated, would result from the international legal principle of sustainability. So already here, sustainability is a principle that serves implementing a legally anchored environmental standard. So already here, sustainability is a process. Even though this early ruling reduces sustainability to its environmental dimension, and this has been criticized a lot, this case points towards the need to apply the principle of sustainability as a procedural duty in relation to environmental standards of international law. I think there are a few advantages of this approach, of this procedural approach. And for me as a lawyer, they are quite exciting because I think the perspective of a legal scholarly approach is changing. We are no longer asking what is sustainability, but we are now asking how can a legally anchored limit be met in relation to environmental global problems, which actors must be or are involved, on which legal levels. And so we give back the question of what sustainability is, we give it back to the law. On the other side, I think there are also challenges to this approach. For example, what we have heard before, the question of opposite environmental goals. So that they can be opposing, that they are not always pointing into the same direction. An interesting discussion at this point is the one of a possible transfer of the Paris Agreement's architecture to other areas of international environmental law or even international law in a broader sense. So this is the discussion, might the Paris Agreement be a blueprint for other areas of international law? To come to an end, I would like to conclude with an outlook. So the steps that need to be taken by each member state of the Paris Agreement to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, and the actors that are taking part in this process, that is the process of sustainability, are only being set up. And as we all know, they are highly insufficient. So I think it was today in the news that I heard that the UN again addressed the policymakers around the world to do more in relation to climate change or combating climate change. One famous example of a process of sustainability are, of course, climate change litigation cases. You might all have heard about the Agenda cases that have gained momentum, but more recently, and here in France this month, we have the decision of the Conseil d'État, or even this year in Germany, just across the river, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, the German Constitutional Court, which ruled on the unconstitutionality of the Federal Climate Change Act. So this is one possible process we can look at with the lenses of sustainability as procedure. The Paris Agreement's procedural elements allow to openly discuss the problem: who decides on the meaning of sustainability? So again, this relational aspect of sustainability, and how its implementation can be legitimized democratically. I think legal scholars ought to follow this process, linking it to the principle of sustainability. Many thanks for your attention and for engaging in the following discussion.
Thank you very, very much. Do we have questions in the room? Oh, sorry. My neighbor. Yeah, sure you are. Okay. Welcome.
I've got two questions.
Yeah, please, you.
Here? Okay. Whoops.
Thank you.
Yeah. So two questions. One is your talk reminded me of a book that's called The Mirage of Sustainability. It's by a philosopher, I think from Lancaster University in the UK. And if I remember it rightly, it's 10 years ago since I read it. It came about 10 years ago. He argues this whole commitment to intergenerational equity is legally bogus. That how can future generations who aren't even born yet be given any sort of legal contractual entity? I mean, I have no idea. So I've been really intrigued to hear what's your take on that. And then there's this, in relation to what you were just mentioning, the cases in Germany, do you know about, there's a Peruvian farmer from the Cordillera Blanca mountains, Huaraz, from Huaraz, who's been encouraged by some NGO, isn't it, to take the German energy company to court for endangering his glacier that threatens his town. So if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. So regarding the first one, yes, it is a debated issue whether future generations can have rights. And I think the question before is, who are the future generations? So is it children? Is it Fridays for Future? Or is it unborn babies? Or is it even babies in, I don't know, 100 of years? So I think this is the first difficulty, and it might be not identical, but refer also to the question of rights of nature. So it's someone who cannot claim his or her rights right now. And for example, the German Constitutional Court in its decision rejected the idea of unborn future generations having rights now. Then it was a bit more complex. It then, in the end, kind of ended up by posing a duty on us now not to take too much or to emit too much GHG now, in order not to impose too many climate change measures to future generations, but the basis was not rights of future generations. But I think there are many other jurisdictions where it is totally possible. There was one case in Colombia where children claimed their rights, but also in the name of unborn generations. And in this case, the Constitutional Court of Colombia, no, it was the Supreme Court. It was the Supreme Court of Colombia accepted the idea of rights for future generations. So I think it really depends on contexts And the second question is about the Liuya versus RWE case. And it is before the ordinary courts in Germany. It's pending now in second instance. And this is a Peruvian farmer, as you said, whose home and farm is beyond the lake, which is taking the melting glaciers water. And I think right now this case has been pending for a long time because the judges decided to go to Peru to look at the situation, and they couldn't go for the COVID pandemic for a long time. But I think now they are. I've read a few days ago that a few of them are actually going there. And here the question is: does the fossil fuel supply or fossil fuel energy company have to pay a percentage of the amount of what needs to be paid in order to make sure that the lake or the dams won't break? So it's about 2,000 euros or something, the case. It's a really small amount of money, but of course it will set precedent if they say that they will have a legal duty to pay for this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the presentation. You mentioned the benefits of having this procedural, this process approach. So my question is, do you see any drawbacks of having having the concept of sustainability as a process? And do you make any connection with the proceduralization of rights we can see, in particular with the European Court of Human Rights? What sort of combination do you make? Or maybe not at all, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the drawbacks or maybe challenges with the approach is that it seems quite empty at a first sight. So I think it is way less than all the pillars and ideas that can be put into sustainability. So I think this maybe in a first moment might be a challenge, but I think it's at the same time also an advantage. But as I said, I think the most important challenge is what do you do if you have, for example, an environmental goal such as the reduction of climate change, which is then interpreted in a democratically legitimized process as building new nuclear power plants. So what do you do then with other global environmental problems, such as, for example, biological diversity in case of a nuclear accident? So I think this is really a problem that might not be captured by this concept. And do I see any parallel to the proceduralization of human rights? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's. Of course, it's some kind of the same idea, but I don't think it's actually linked. Yeah.
May I? No, I think the topic is fascinating, and I disagree with you on the last point, because in the 20 years ago there was a strong orientation in looking at the convention, which very much along the lines you have developed here. But the problem is perhaps a bit more that when you get into the substance matter, and that you get into when you have procedures which allow you to understand what you mean with things. So, and I think that's an area where there's still also, from your topic's point of view, much to do. You need procedures so that we have a common understanding of what sustainability means. And I think it has emerged already from this meeting room that there are great differences, and I think that those interested in philosophy or in anthropology, the ways man can see on himself are, if not without limits, at least extremely large. And before we agree on what we mean, there is considerable work to be carried out. And usually we need procedures for that so that we can take decisions and we don't just run into a battlefield and see who comes out alive. But if you look at human rights, yes, many rights are basically rights of procedure. To find ways of putting people together so they can discuss and see what is right and wrong. But there are some absolutes. Torture, killings, and such things. And I think those absolutes exist also in the area of environmental protection. They are perhaps not so easy to identify, but I do think we sense a few who are on the horizon and where we cannot just say this is a procedure. No, this is a no-no. And from that perspective, I think there is more to gain from a visit of the discussions around the European Convention and the area of human rights, perhaps more in general, and environmental protection when it comes to these issues. So I would, well, personally think it's worthwhile pursuing a bit more that comparison. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this comment. I think maybe then I got the question a bit different, because I think I can agree with you, because also the approach I proposed is also not empty of substance. It's always connected to some environmental goal or limit that has already been set. So, and I think the 1.5 degree temperature goal is quite absolute and is quite clear, but it is in a way also quite linear, because it's only looking at climate change. So that's maybe where it's a bit less than if we talk about sustainability as a whole. But yeah, thank you. I've noted this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you get a very important point on the necessary discussions on who decides on the meaning of sustainability. But I think here democracy is also done in two steps. So first the debates and then the decision. And my question here is who debates on the meaning of sustainability? And I think I do not know very much about law and how legal concepts are developed and evolves, but how can the legal framework help to promote debate on this issue of sustainability? It's a very broad question and maybe naive, but it's interdisciplinary.
Yeah, I think who debates is definitely a legitimate question if I talk about democratic legitimation and processes. And I think this is always and still insufficient, also on the international level. But then the question is also, what do you compare it to? And I think the international legal regime is one of the first legal regimes, but still insufficient, where global South countries have more voice than compared to other areas of international law. And of course, there's also, at least in Germany, there's currently a debate on the on decolonizing international environmental law, and I think it is really important that it has not only been for environmental protection, but also for taking natural resources. But still, I think there is a will, and there's also a lot of initiative to make voices heard that have not been heard on an international level before. So I think this may be one example where we can look at how did we even arrive at the moment of the 1.5 degree goal, and then you can ask this question, of course, at each level of governance or of lawmaking. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. This is a very good topic and very interesting presentation. I would like to make some comments regarding Professor Campbell's question. Actually, there was a Dutch decision on Shell and its corporate responsibility. And basically, Dutch courts accepted the responsibility of oil companies on the climate change.
and I believe they paid some damages and harms, if I'm not wrong. And there is one issue while you are making your presentation just came to my mind, that if you take the sustainability as can be resolved by a procedure, it may create in a way some major problems in international law and the other parts of international law, for instance, state sovereignty. If we go back to German judges would like to see the lake and those glaciers, that if they really melting, or is it the responsibility of those enterprises who are cooperating in there, it may be a problem for, I don't know, maybe the Peruvian government or Peru, because it's a sovereign state at the end of the day. So judicially, it may create the practical problems. This is a comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, super interesting addition, I think, also on the Shell decision. Thank you, that's important. I don't know whether there are sovereignty issues, because do you mean by the judges going there or by them rendering the judgment in the end?
Well, actually, maybe both, because as we know that some regimes under international law are also political and diplomatic, so many problems may arise in that way. I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's true, and I think in the German debate, at least, this decision to go there and to take the proofs has been welcomed from this climate change legal sphere, because it is a first step to accept that it could be something. But I think your perspective is really adding from the other side. It's interesting.
One thing about that, you may check the Talisman case, and if I'm not wrong, Canada also had the similar issues about the South Sudan and the oil companies who were cooperating in there.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know this case.
May I just add that on this issue, fact-finding, there is a problem, especially very vivid in the Council of Europe, but of course worldwide also. That is, how do you do fact-finding in other states? Because they are sovereign, and they can, if you are an official state mission at least, say no. If you are just tourists going there, either you can get arrested if you're in some countries because you are doing espionage. Sometimes you get away with it. But it is a problem. And one way to solve it is, of course, to have protocols signed between states allowing this kind of fact-finding, or at least ad hoc arrangements between the states. But I think it's a very important issue, because we are not all confronted to the same dangers, and from that perspective we may have little knowledge of what is happening far away on Earth, and in order to take informed decision we need to have this. But it's something for the international community or for states to work on a bilateral basis to ensure that these fact-finding missions can take place. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually super interesting, because it is a moment where you see that the world is getting smaller. You don't say, oh, this is in Peru, this is something we German lawyers don't have to care about, but okay, actually we have to know what happens there. And then you might have to go there, and then it's maybe also a diplomatic question. I think this is really interesting, how climate change as a global problem is putting us all into one.
No? So I would like to say a big thank you to Anna Julia, to Nathalie and to Ben for their nice presentation. And we have now time for a coffee break, so I invite all of you outside for 20 minutes, right, Elisabeth? Gwenaël, 20 minutes of
exactly.
break.
We come here back at 4:45. Yeah. 5:45. Yeah, sorry. There is So in a little bit more than 20 minutes. And we have here a bell. This is a Himalayan bell, going for you. And this is also to eliminate the bad spirits, okay? So this is to come back.
Eliminate
the bad spirits? I don't know which one.
Yeah.